So very good evening, guys. Welcome to day 7 of this initiative of Civil's Daily of Daily Answer Wars and Daily Answer War Prime. So I hope all of you are doing good. And yesterday was a Sunday, so again we resumed our initiative today. And in the morning, a question was given in the Telegram group, and some of you have posted your answers in the group itself. And in this session, we will be trying to dissect that question, see what all could have been written in the answer, evolve a basic framework, and then we will go for looking at some of the copies that you have submitted in the Telegram group. So starting with the question, like it was a DS3 question from previous years only, like 2022 paper only. Recently, it was asked, and it was based on inclusive growth. So inclusive growth is an important part of the topic, economy topic under GS3. So the question was pretty simple, but you had to have the understanding of some particular economic terms. For example, you needed to know about inclusive growth, you needed to know about financial inclusion, you needed to know about market economy. So these were two or three basic terms in the question that you needed to know if you were to write a good answer in this particular question. So the question was, is inclusive growth possible under market economy? State the significance of financial inclusion in achieving economic growth in India. So basically, there were no dicey keywords in this question. So it was a pretty straightforward. With that respect, I will say, because the question was pretty clear. You had in the first part, you had to address like this part, that is whether inclusive growth is possible under market economy or not. So market economy is basically economy based on profits. Markets run the state of affairs in this economy. Basically, you can say that after 1991 reforms, India also is on the path of becoming a market economy, although we are still a mixed economy as according to most of the economists. So, question was whether inclusive growth is possible under market economy or not. So, you had to write both the perspectives. Like, if you were like an experienced answer writer, you would have given both the perspectives of whether what are the factors that support the growth of inclusive growth in market economy, and then what are the obstacles that uh, are present in market economy to inclusive growth. And these two parts were required in this first part. Uh, there some people I have seen what they do is like they straight away jump to a conclusion that yes, inclusive growth is possible or no, inclusive growth is not possible, but I don't think that was required here. You needed to analyze. There can be no specific answer. All of us are striving for inclusive growth in every possible economy, whether it be state dominated economy, mixed economy, or market economy. So you just needed to write both those sections, like what are the factors that support inclusive growth under market economy and what are the obstacles. So this was the first part of the question. Moving on to the next part, you had to just talk about financial inclusion a bit. So a basic primary definition would have done, and then you needed to talk about significance of financial inclusion. So 4 or 5 points related to significance of financial inclusion, achieving economic growth. You needed to talk about like how financial inclusion can help in achieving economic growth. So this was the basic framework of the answer, and then you could have just concluded. So this was the basic framework. We will see like what all we could have written in specific sections, and what all examples or different points we could have used, keywords we could have used, that we will see during the course of this discussion. I hope you have written along those lines, because some copies that I have seen are along those lines. There are some points that need to be improved, and we will discuss that in this session itself. So, good evening, Varsha. Good evening, Nisha. So, starting with the introduction of this answer, inclusive, just a basic definition of inclusive growth I have started with. Like, again, I have talked about using definitions, current affairs, or some data points in the introduction. So, here you could have just defined inclusive growth. So, inclusive growth means economic growth that creates equitable employment opportunities and benefits for all sections of society. So the important part in this definition is this all sections of society. So it should be dispersed across the society, like every part of the society, even the marginalized and the vulnerable section, should feel the impact of growth and experience betterment in their way of life. So its impact includes poverty reduction and socio-economic development through improvements in health, education, skills, etc. So this was the basic definition. I had formed it at that instant itself. Otherwise, there are particular definitions from different institutions. Like you could have used the definition from OECD, from World Bank, from IMF. Multiple institutions give their own definitions, but the concept is basically this only. So you could have put it in your own terms also. if you remembered some particular definition, you could have used it. That was not an issue. So next we move on to talking about what are the factors that support inclusive growth under market economy. Factors in support of inclusive growth under market economy. So this was part 1A, you can say, of the question. So first and foremost, we can start by giving some data to back our arguments, like support in favor of this argument. For example, the most important data that you could have talked about is about declining poverty. So what we see is, if poverty is declining, it means growth is inclusive. Like more people are getting the benefits of growth. So that is a very obvious correlation. So you could have talked about that faster decline in poverty, and you could have substantiated with it with some examples. The most prominent example that I think most of you must have used is about India itself. Like after 1991, we declined poverty in our country declined at a faster pace, and this example is often quoted that 270 million people have been removed out of poverty in this decade of 2005 to 2015. So this was an example related to India, a very primary one which you could have used easily. Next, you could have also talked about China's poverty reduction. For example, since the 1980s, 1980s was the time when China embarked upon the path of market reforms, like uh, capitalistic economy, just economy wise. So they embarked upon that path, and that helped reduce their poverty of about 80 crore people. So that is also a very significant number which you could have put here. Next, so I think this is self-explanatory point, that because this data just supports the point about market economy, so I think it is pretty relevant here. Next, you can talk about creation of jobs. So what happens in market economy is that there are a lot of business which operate in the economy of the country, and since they try to grow and create profit, so they also try to create, in that process they also create jobs. For example, they can you can write that market economy provides space for businesses to make their decisions and grow at a good pace, which create more opportunities for the masses by job creation and mobilizing resources. For example, in India also you can see there are a lot of companies that have come here after especially the lifting of those market controls, like foreign companies have come in, that has resulted in a lot of job opportunities. Most of the IT sector companies, you can say, are based in countries like America or Singapore or such areas, and but they come to India, open their services, and provide jobs to the local people. So that is a very important uh, feature of a market economy which you could have written. And a related point that you could have added is that it also results in increase in wages. For example, as the economy grows, the market economy grows, uh, profits increase. So when the profits increase, the wages also increase. Like people start demanding more wages, and this leads to better living standard of the people working in those companies. For example, the accessibility to education and health facilities, all of this improve. You can see this example in most of the Western countries, like their wages are pretty high. They started on a low base, but now they are pretty high. And in India also, you can imagine a similar path. Like we are still, we get low wages. Like Indian people, wages, labor is cheap in India, but still we are expecting to increase our wages substantially in the recent future. So you can talk about that. So these 2 points are related. Next, you must have heard about trickle down effect. So trickle down effect is basically a theory in economics that says that if the growth is overall growth is there, eventually it will trickle down to all the parts of the society. So this is basically a justification of market economy that many economists have used in the past. So you could have just used this keyword to substantiate your answer and points. For example, according to the trickle-down effect theory, the advantages of greater economic growth eventually trickle down to all facets of society. For example, you can talk about here again rise in India's GDP. If you could remember the data points, you could have mentioned, for example, before 1991, again, India's GDP was quite low, and poverty was rampant in this country, and growth was, since the growth was quite low, trickle down was also very low. And after 1991, again, like in recent times, we are about 35 billion dollars so of GDP. So, uh, due to the rise in India's GDP, the growth is also rising. Like it is trickling down to the poorest section of the society. So you could have used this example to substantiate this point. But if you could have mentioned these keywords like trickle down effect, it would have helped in getting some more marks. Next, you can talk about innovation. For example, it helps in bringing innovative solutions to societal problems. Now, what happens in a market economy is that the corporate sector or the private sector gets money and invests that money in research and development, and that helps in bringing innovative solutions to all parts of society, including the societal problems in major areas like health, education, etc. Other than that, they also try to put money in research and development and design innovative products or outstanding products that help the quality of life for poorer people in the country. If market economy is not there, the money in the hands of the government usually is expended on the welfare policies, and very less money is left in the hands of the government to spend on innovation and also innovation certainly increases in case of a market economy. So you could have added this. Next, you can talk about higher government revenues, increased welfare. So when a market economy is present in a country, it will again, as I have already talked about, you understand that wages increase, jobs increase, so that again results in higher taxation. Like government puts different people in different slabs, as you can see in every budget, tax slabs are put out. So what happens is that when the people pay their taxes, that money goes to the government, and the government gets access to more money, and then they can expend it on increased welfare or high social sector expenditure, so that again inclusive growth is there and most poor and marginalized people of the country get their share of welfare benefits. So that you could have added here. So these, I think, were sufficient points, 4 or 5 points to write about when you are talking about how market economy can help in inclusive growth. Next, we can talk about how there are some obstacles still to inclusive growth in the market economy. Again, there are 3, 4 very good points that you could have written about in this part. First and foremost, being regional disparities. Now, you can just see that India is almost divided along west and east on the basis of development. Like eastern part, especially the states of Bihar, Jharkhand, Odisha, are all a bit underdeveloped, like lagging in development from the western part. For example, states like Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka. So you can see that there are prevalent regional disparities in growth. And what market economy does is like the more corporate companies see growth in an area or a region performing well, they will be like automatically uh, inclined to invest in those regions further rather than in the backward regions because of fear of ease of doing business, crime, etc. So that again further accentuates the regional disparities. So you could have explained it through this example that Karnataka and Maharashtra received 64% of total FDI equity inflows in 2021-2022 alone. If you could not remember this, you could have just given example of eastern-western divide, for example, that I just told you. Give example of states like Bihar and Goa, or Bihar and Gujarat, or Bihar and Maharashtra. Next, you can also talk about jobless growth and informalization of labor. The market economy emphasizes on reducing cost of production for being competitive because they are driven by profits. So automatically, the corporates will try to reduce their costs. And what happens is whenever they see excessive jobs, that hiring and firing starts, and growth becomes jobless. So that is a very recent debate also. Like in newspapers, you will get to read about this thing that India has witnessed jobless growth and increasing informal jobs post LPG reforms. So this you can write about. Next, the government sector. One advantage in the government sector or the state economy is that there is just job security, and that has led to inefficiency in the past. For example, most of the PSUs you can see today are in loss, and still uh, firing is very less because they are again the scene of protests and all strikes that happens. So job security is more in the government sector and less in the market economy. So you can talk about this jobless growth and informalization of labor. Next, you can also talk about affordability of social services like health and education. So in the first part, we talked about accessibility. So accessibility has increased because you see that there have many education and health institutions cropped up in our cities, towns, even villages. So accessibility has no doubt increased as wages have increased. People have more money in their pocket, so they can go to those centers also. But affordability of social services still is low. For example, when you go for quality health and education like high quality private care, even in private schools, like very they are very expensive, and most of the people from poor section of the society are still out of reach. Like they do not have that much out of pocket expenditure that they can afford those social services, and that creates virtually a divide between the rich and poor in the society, and that is not inclusive. So you can talk about this affordability of social services. Next, you can also mention about increasing inequalities. For example, here again you can talk about Oxfam International report. So 73% of India's wealth went to just 1% of the population. There are multiple data to substantiate this. Like you can also talk about like 5% of the population. Any data set you can mention and talk about increasing inequalities. And not only income inequalities, market economy also promote gender inequalities. For example, you will see that most of the jobs are uh, male centric. Males get more jobs in the society rather than females. Then there are regional inequalities, class inequalities, and more such inequalities. For example, you can say that there are reservations are not present in the private sector, so that leads to uh, lack of affirmative action in the case of market economy. So those examples also you can give if you don't remember the data exactly, so you can mention this broadly. Next is environmental concerns. So again, here most of the corporates or the market is concerned with their profits and competition. So that what it leads to is like loss for the concern of environment, lack of concern for the environment, and government is forced to uh, like ease their environmental and labor and all such rules so that more investment can flow, and this is a negative in itself, which leads to not an inclusive growth, like the air quality and all is becomes bad, and that leads to more diseases and all. So that is like a multiplier effect. So you can talk about this also when you talk about problems that market economy poses to inclusive growth. So I think you got it. Most of the points here are also pretty easy, pretty in news, and you can just, if you just brainstorm a bit, I think you will be able to come up with at least three, four of such points. Next part of the question was related to financial inclusion. Now, financial inclusion is also a part of inclusive growth. You can say that. So when we talk about significance of financial inclusion in achieving, so first and foremost, you can talk about reduction in poverty. For example, greater access to financial services would help in decreasing income inequality and poverty and would lead to increase in employment levels. For example, you can talk about multiplier effect here. So if there is more flow of credit, more flow of income to the poor people, they can put it in some business, or they can just start their own enterprise, and that reduces the poverty of that group. So you can talk about this multiplier effect in this case. Next, it can also lead to growth. For example, channels the poor savings into regulated financial institutions and mobilizes them for investments. So what happens is, for example, you can see that Pradhan Mantri them for investments. So what happens is, for example, you can see that Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana (PMJDY) was pretty successful, and it has been like claimed as one of the biggest successes of this government. So more than 43 million beneficiaries have deposited money through PMJDY. So when these beneficiaries deposit this money, so the banks can again use this for investing in capital formation. So this can help in again boosting the economy as a whole. So that money from the poor, although they are in very small amounts, but you can imagine that if 43.404 billion people, even if they put a small amount of money, and if that is used for investments or capital creation, that can lead to a huge increase in growth. So that is one of the points for financial inclusion. Next, you can also talk about entrepreneurship. For example, again, as I talked about in the first point itself, so transparent credit from banking institutions promotes the entrepreneurial spirit among the people, which will lead to increase in productivity in rural areas. So you can talk about initiating a virtuous cycle also. So inclusive growth and financial inclusion leads to culture of saving, which initiates a virtuous cycle of economic development. So when you have a particular amount of savings, you can think of investing it in some of killing yourself or doing something which can lead to your own growth. So that is that virtuous cycle. So when there is a culture of saving, that also leads to more investments, and then that investment leads to poverty reduction and all, basically inclusive growth. And this is a cycle, a virtuous cycle which keeps on evolving if you keep on saving and investing. Next, we can also talk about efficiency of banks. So banks which are operating in a financial inclusion sector could experience higher operating efficiency in financial intermediation. So, if more money is deposited to banks, and they are working in this sector itself for financial inclusion, they can use that money for more operating efficiency, for more banking, remote banking. Like they can employ more banking correspondents and go further, give last mile delivery so that their efficiency increase further. Next, you can talk about decrease in corruption or transparency. So this direct benefit of transfer that has been employed in recent times has also resulted in pretty efficient delivery of services. You can give the example that 44,000 crores government was expected to save in the fiscal to 2020 to 2021. So you must have heard that once Rajiv Gandhi had told that very famous statement that if 1 rupee is sent from the center, 19 or 20 paise just reaches to the poor for whom that money, that 1 rupee is intended. So that in the middle, 80 paise goes in the pockets of intermediaries, or corruption takes roots, and that money just vanishes, it turns into black money. So that has certainly reduced in the present times. For example, now directly we can transfer into the accounts of the poor people, and whatever money the government tries to send, that reaches that beneficiary itself. Now again, this also had some disadvantages, which is a different topic. You can talk about like inclusion, exclusion, and all, but overall corruption has certainly reduced due to direct benefit of transfer. So these points you can talk about in the significance of financial inclusion. Just be sure to include some of the examples. For example, this Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, this has been a very successful scheme, and many economists and many institutions have praised the government for this scheme. So you could have talked about this. Direct benefit of transfers can also be certainly mentioned, because this is also a very important initiative in the field of financial inclusion. So this was about significance of financial inclusion. Next, you could just come to the conclusion part and try to write a bit of futuristic conclusion, like that is integrating it with a way forward. Some of your points from way forward, because already we have three parts in this question, and since this is a 10 marker, I don't think there was much scope to write a way forward separately. That would have again resulted in more space. If you had more space, or if this was a 15 marker, you could have thought of writing a way forward, but in this there was no scope, so you can just include a basic way forward in the conclusion itself. So in a diverse country like India, financial inclusion is a critical part of the development process. Measures such as introduction of jam trinity have been transformative. So just a line of praise for jam trinity, because this was pretty much in news, and I think the question has been framed due to that only. So this Jandan Aadhaar Mobile Trinity, I think you must have known about it. Connection of these three things that resulted in increase in financial inclusion in India. So existing digital platforms, infrastructure, human resources, and technological innovation. So these are some way forward points. Like these things can be leveraged for further success of financial inclusion. Like we can use these things for making financial inclusion more successful. So these were the points basically that you needed to write in order to write a very good answer. And I think some of you have written such answers. We will look at the copies in the meanwhile in some time. Meanwhile, if you have any doubts, you can ask in the chat box. What's up? But sir, in case of sudden shock like pandemic, won't there be unemployment and multiple layoffs in market economy? So won't it reduce affordability and accessibility? Of course, Versa, like in case of pandemic, but that is a black swan event. Like uh, by black swan event, I mean that pandemics are rare events. They don't happen like every uh, year or every 2 years, 3 years. So you cannot form your answer on the basis of pandemics. You can include a point relating to pandemic when you write about obstacles, that in case of sudden shocks leads to loss in jobs, and that will lead to decrease in affordability and accessibility. But here in this answer, we are not focusing it from the pandemic point of view. We are just talking broadly about inclusive growth, and what happens mostly in the case of a market economy. So I have talked about that. Market economy leads to increase in jobs. As you can see that most of India's jobs today also are in private sector, and that has led to increase in wages, and also that will automatically increase accessibility to health services and all. Affordability, you can talk about. I have mentioned affordability in obstacles itself, because affordability is again two-edged sword. For example, still now private education fees and private healthcare is pretty costly in India, and many of the marginalized or vulnerable section are not being able to afford it. So you can mention that in obstacles. So let us move to the answers now. So Varsha, your copy first. As per OECD, inclusive growth is economic growth that is distributed fairly across society and creates opportunities for all. So this is fine. Next, you are talking about inclusive growth, social development of vulnerable section, employment opportunities for all, access to essential services. Okay, fine. But I think when you have just mentioned this definition, there was no need to again mention flowchart, or you could have just gone for the flowchart if you wanted to. Both those things are not necessary to mention. However, a market economy does talk about obstacles. Like, however, a market economy doesn't favor inclusive growth. So don't go for writing doesn't in the first part itself. You are not being asked to just give opinions so quick, and such opinions are not true also, because even economists have been debating over such issue, big economists and scholars. So don't go for forming opinion very quickly. If there is compulsorily a question asking for your opinion, you can use it, you can form an opinion, but do that also in the latter part of your answer. First you just go for the positives and negatives, then we will see whether we have the scope of analyzing or not. Here it was not required. You could have just talked about some of the obstacles and then move ahead. So preference of skilled over unskilled workforce, employment opportunities to all is not possible. So this is true, but again, this point could have been written afterwards, because employment opportunities to all is not possible in any case. For example, even in state economy, you cannot say that you can give employment to every person. Importance of demand over need of people, essential services become less affordable. Yeah, affordability you can talk about just as I told, but accessibility increases. So there is a bit of difference in both of those points. In unequal growth, private sector invest only in those sectors with the highest returns. Okay. Pollution development is not environment friendly, not concerned about vulnerable section. Private sector focus only on the numbers. Significance of, okay. So I think some of the points you could have made it better. For example, you could have talked when you are writing about obstacles, you must talk about inequalities. For example, this has been a major debate after LPG reforms, that although our growth has been good, but it has been very unequal. For example, that Oxfam report, every time it comes in news, that most of India's wealth is with a very less percent of people. So you can just use it in this answer. Next, you can also talk about regional disparities. For example, state-wise disparity, region-wise disparity, and that is also a very important talking point. So try to mention those two, 3 points here. After that, you can talk about whatever you have mentioned. So these are decent enough points. Significance of financial inclusion. In the 11th first year 5-year plan of India, it was envisaged that economic growth should be inclusive in nature. Okay. So this is good. Nice use of flowchart here. You need not write the definition directly. Without writing this, you could have also, if you could have drawn this, it would have been sufficient. Some of the government schemes to ensure financial inclusion, Jana Mudra, PM, no. So government schemes, you can just draw a small box and mention it. They are asking for the more theory part, like they are asking what is the significance of financial inclusion in economic growth. So you need to analyze the importance of financial inclusion rather than talking about just schemes. So what you can do is, like when you are writing about these points, just try to explain a bit. First, define financial inclusion, and then explain how increase in savings lead to increase in investment, how it can lead to increase in capital formation, and that in turn can lead to growth. How financial inclusion can make banking more efficient, how it can uh, DBT can help in reducing corruption. So these things you can relate here only. Just write some short paragraph, short clauses, phrases, form some small phrases, use examples, and write here only. That will also be good enough. Examples you can just use in a very small box. You can just write sidewise, side inside somewhere. Otherwise, don't use it. Don't write it in the main part. You can use it again in the conclusion part. Like you can just say that schemes like Jan Dhan, Mudra Yojana, Atal Pension Yojana have been extremely effective in making financial inclusion in a success in India, and more measures need to be taken. For example, this and this. So you can write this conclusion. Obstacles to inclusive growth. Equality. No, so obstacles here are not required, I guess. Uh, this you have already written when you are talking about market economy. SDG 8 aims to promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and active employment, decent work for all. Market economy increases efficiency, innovation brings in freedom of consumer. However, to bring in inclusive growth, there should be ample government intervention so that growth trickles down to reach even the lowest strata of society. Yeah, but rather than trickles down, you can talk about welfare here. Although your conclusion is fine, like your concept is decent enough, but here you can just talk about welfare, because trickle down is specifically associated with market economy. Like most of the economists have argued that in market economy, growth is due to growth, like benefits is expected to trickle down. So when you are talking about government sector or state intervention, talk about welfare or affirmative action. So those are more better keywords when you are talking about government or state. uh, sections intervention in economy. So decent enough conclusion. Just keep it a bit short. You could have also talked about financial inclusion related to something related to financial inclusion if you wanted to, but this will also do. That is, there is no harm in talking about this. Overall, I think you understood what I meant to say. This part needs to be explained a bit. And in the first part, you just need to talk about both the positives of market economy and the negatives with respect to inclusive growth. And points can also be a bit better. So I think out of 10, you will get 3.5 for this answer. Versa, there are some improvements that you can make in this answer. Next, we move to Ranu's copy as per OECD. Okay, inclusive growth is fine. Concentrating in regarded step towards the market economy is conceivable. Yes. Yeah, you can go for it. It is conceivable. Rather than directly writing yes, no, you can just leave it at here only. Is it possible to achieve inclusive growth in a market economy? If yes, then how? Okay, rising government spending. This is okay. Decreased poverty, able to trickle down. So, however, there are obstacles to inclusive growth. Total concern income inequality. So, fine, you have written most of the points, I think, but some points can be increased here. Otherwise, I think the points are quite good. Both parts have been written sufficiently well. Next, we move on to talking about financial significance of financial inclusion, achieving economic growth, decline in cash economy, gaining growth is good. Cash economy, I think, is more related to fintech sector, like that is related to technological development in finance rather than financial inclusion. Financial inclusion is basically the reach of banking, the reach of services like savings, credit, and insurance to the poor and marginalized. And also try to define financial inclusion in one line, and then you can write about significance of financial inclusion because directly jumping to it will is like not giving a linking statement. For example, the question is asking about financial inclusion, so it will expect you to write a basic statement about what do you understand about financial inclusion. So just give a basic definition primary, then go for writing about the significance. Other points are decent, I think. Savings and all, entrepreneurship decreases corruption. We just taken okay way forward. World has suggested in practical way countries should increase public. Okay, inclusive growth will help in the empowerment of vulnerable. Okay. So I think you have written very decently. In 2 pages, I think you have packed up a lot of information with the use of flowcharts and all. But yes, financial inclusion could have been defined, and some more uh, like points could be added in both these parts about market economy support in favor of inclusive growth and obstacles both. And what you could have done is omitted the way forward because it was not exactly needed here. Because in conclusion itself, you could have integrated something about way forward. But overall, a very good attempt, Ranu. I think you will get 4 to 4.5 out of 10 for this answer. Next, we will meet tomorrow again. Varsha, I think you got what I told. So we will meet again tomorrow with a new question and a evaluation and feedback session in the evening. Keep on writing, keep practicing your answers, and keep improving. Update your notes with some of the good answers that you find in the group, and also try to keep giving peer reviews. So thank you very much, guys. And again, we will meet tomorrow.